healthcare transformation is a big topic of conversation. Things that feel like they've been around forever, like service design. Service design's been around for centuries, predates
Yeah.
most other design practices we know of, right? But only now am I seeing at healthcare conferences and CX conferences whole segments on service design. It's like they're finally getting it, and they're getting the need for this holistic view of how things work. We start getting into emerging technologies. I mean, sometimes it feels like a joke to talk about in healthcare, where it feels like some things are so far behind that if they would just get to the stuff that everybody thought was novel 10 years ago, would be winning.
Welcome to Creative Health Tech, your dose of strategic creativity from the minds pushing the boundaries of the health tech industry. We are your hosts, Ralph Marquez and Felipe Silveira, founders of Moly.
Today, we're excited to explore the roles design can have in success of health tech businesses. So joining us is Adam Bunke, a seasoned design leader focused on shaping experience to improve lives at companies such as Tocatri, Philippes, and School Care. Adam, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Awesome. So we generally start asking your guests to share their background for our audience. Tell us a little bit about you, your career. We know you've been for a couple of years in this industry, and also your path in this health tech landscape.
Yeah. I've been a designer by so many definitions over the last 20 years. There are little brief detours where I thought my band was going to make it, and self fine art on the side, But yeah, for 20 years, I've been a designer. I started in the agency world, starting in the graphic design path and kind of worked my way up to creative director. And I was running all of digital for an agency in Florida for a while. So you name it, I was building brands, running campaigns, writing
Yeah.
code, post production. Yeah, the list goes on. And it just, I don't know, at some point it started feeling kind of hollow to me because we were,
Hmm.
people were buying sandwiches and, but it wasn't really solving major problems. And we weren't doing the thorough exploration that I really wanted to do to understand if what we were doing really went somewhere. Outcomes data wasn't a thing anybody talked about. And so I left the agency world and went into healthcare. And really for the majority of my career now, that's where I've been. And in healthcare, it's, a lot of it's been early stage companies or growth stage companies. A little bit of a break at Philips, big 80,000 person company, trying to help them build design maturity, trying to help them form a relationship with their audience, and to really, really get to solving actual problems that matter. So I've worked in
Hmm.
bundle-based insurance reimbursement. Please don't ask me to go further into that. I've worked in pediatric care. I've worked in sleep and respiratory care, and most recently, I'm just finishing up
Yeah.
3 years at psychiatry and mental health, psychiatric care and therapy.
Nice. And it's fun that I think now almost every episode we're gonna say this, how a lot of people come from agencies, advertising agencies, classic marketing agencies, and find their paths in health and health tech. You mentioned, Lisa, that you work on different areas of health tech. What do you saw as the difference between, those different areas of health? What were some things that was basically the same for all of them? Or do you feel like each one demands different challenge in terms of design work?
Yeah, there are similarities across all of them. I mean, big similarities are healthcare is busted, and in any category you look at, there's stuff to fix, right? And I think everywhere I've worked, there's been pretty consistent need for design maturity and the presence of a design organization to kind of help build that bridge between, whether it's
Mm,
patients or it's doctors or it's ACOs or it's health systems with that organization. Things that are different would be, working in the insurance space is very, very different than working in mental health. There's
mm-hmm.
different sorts of regulations, there's different sorts of requirements, there's different sorts of oversight. When I was working at Remedy Partners, and I think they're now Signify, which just got bought by CVS. That's fun to put on a resume. They were working with all sorts of different sorts of health entities, but also working with patients, but also working with doctors. And so we were looking at very specialized things like joint replacement, things that have been around a while. There's all sorts of
Yeah.
mechanics. It's a little bit more largely accepted around the country, like joint replacement, go to a doctor, all these things that happen. Whereas mental health, the other end of the spectrum, there's still a lot of stigma around whether you should even go seek help for mental health. In some cultures, it's seen as weakness to pursue it. And so in some areas where it's like, all right, there are books and papers and specialists, and we can just draw on all of that to help people move towards it. And mental health, it's sort of like, how do we overcome a stigma that is deeply rooted in our culture that really varies? And also like the net is much broader. Everyone's your audience. Everybody needs mental health help. And so
Mm-hmm.
how do you segment and how do you present as relevant and resonant to someone who's 18 versus someone who's 67, you know? So that variety was quite different. And then at
Interesting.
Philips, Philips had probably the largest in-house design team in the world when I was there. They had maybe 900 designers across the globe.
Wow.
Phenomenally gifted group of people, but a really big organization. And so maybe there was a lot more process and methods and politics to navigate there, and the speed was a lot slower. So as a
Mhm.
designer there, it was sort of like, I just want to talk to users. And you're banging your head against the wall with like, an army of regulatory attorneys and other folks who like they all mean well, but they're trying to protect the fortress. I'm trying to hear what users are doing. Somewhere in the middle, we have conflict. So yeah, I mean, I think every sort of space has its own challenges, but there's certainly horizontals that are consistent everywhere. Everybody really needs design practices and connection to their audience. Everybody really needs a
Mhm.
sense of how to manifest the art of the possible and how to achieve it. And a lot of healthcare entities, they don't really, design is not an inherent practice. They have very operational
Mhm.
backgrounds, they're very clinical backgrounds. And so this concept of what if there are constraints? What if we just imagine together? What if we involve you in research? What if we draw with markers together and then watch that become real? They're not used to that. It's a really foreign thing. And so I think everywhere I've been using that as a mechanism to build relationships and build trust and really build excitement and what it's about has been
Yeah.
great for getting design in the right place and kind of showing why it belongs there.
Yeah, like you mentioned about working at Philips and how you wanted to do a lot, but sometimes you couldn't. There are a lot of things to navigate. Also, healthcare as a whole is really heavily regulated. How do you feel like, because like there's still need to innovate, especially nowadays with so many competition and so many opportunities. How do you foster creativity in a team in an environment like that, like as a design lead?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, the regulations are there, and I get that some folks see that as like barriers that kind of block your creativity.
Mhm.
To me, design
Hmm.
doesn't exist without constraint, and so it's just
Yeah.
a bullet point in a brief,
Agree.
right? Like, hey, you can't take everybody's data. Okay, great. So we can't do that. What
Okay.
else can we do? Great, yeah. And so I think it inspires creativity because you're forced to do things that aren't conventional. If you were working for some unregulated space, like sure, use the dark Jedi powers in HubSpot to take everybody's data and hyper personalize their content and all that, right? In healthcare, you're prevented from doing that because if there's enough of their data in one place, you could identify that person and now you've violated HIPAA
Mhm.
laws and all that. But it doesn't mean you can't build a relationship. It doesn't mean that you can't help them to get to the outcomes they need. And so some of it's about a repositioning, right? In some ways, I feel like working in healthcare has allowed me to be much more centered on the end result of what someone is seeking instead of so much of this in between stuff that's like, well, how does marketing get their numbers up? How do we get all this data that we need? How
Mhm.
do we, instead it's like, whether it's a brand exercise, you're building products or whatever, it's they want to feel better. They want to feel this on the other side. All this stuff in the middle can and should change. And so I think the creativity comes from embracing change and that nothing is done, nothing is permanent. And it inspires us to go back to that audience and learn more all the time and to go into rooms and assume that we're wrong or even hope that we're wrong so we can learn more about that group and represent them better. But yeah, I think sometimes it feels like creativity can be stifled because table stakes seem innovative in a lot of healthcare organizations. Like
Mhm.
some companies are like, we don't even have a good patient portal. And you're like, it's 2024. Buy one. My God, like get to this
Yeah.
standard of like people just expect this stuff of you. Like
Yeah.
forget innovation in some places. It's just like do the stuff they just basically need.
Yeah, yeah, just
Now
the
now let's
basic.
talk about, like a lot of folks will run into it now going, well, let's just stuff AI into everything. And you're like, but it's a material like every other, just like paint, right? And so like when's the best time to
Mhm.
apply it? Because patients aren't necessarily going like, "Oh my god, I need AI to cure my problems." They're going, "I have problems and I need help." So I think the creativity kind of comes from like, what can we do to help you with that?
Mhm.
There's an endless, I think, fountain of ways that you can do that, and sometimes it's really simple. Everybody hates intake processes, right? You go to the doctor, you have to fill out the same form
Yep.
57 times, the same. Everybody hates that, right? It's been done to death. Companies redesign them all the time, right? Simple things like you told me your name, so now I'm going to use your name when I talk to you. Little things like that create a bond and build trust and build a relationship that helps someone who's probably really scared or uncertain about what to do feel like they're being heard. And
Mhm.
so I think some of that inspiration that goes into what we create, whatever great big ungodly innovation it might be, still comes back to making sure people feel seen and making sure people feel heard and trying to meet them where they're at. I could go on and on. I'll start soapboxing. So,
Yeah.
but yeah,
And
did that
like,
answer your question? Yeah.
yeah, it answers, yeah, and also open up for more questions because, for example, like this responsibility of the role of the designer in trying to make the optimal experience in considering like how we can really like make an improvement in patients' lives and the user's life. Do you feel that like this responsibility kind of influence the design process as well and the team culture?
Yeah, I think so. I see a lot of activism in designers, at least in the folks that I've built, where there's just this inherent need to fight for these folks. Because like maybe the system isn't thinking about them the way that we would. You know, and it's
Mhm.
the blessing and the curse of what we do because our world is to build and develop empathy and share context. And, so we try to live the lives that they're living. We try to feel what they're feeling. And so the dark side of feeling what people are feeling is that you feel it. And so then you really, really want to change the pain that you see. Then there's the tension of, I want to fix this for them, but I have processes and structure and resources and stuff I have to combat sometimes or figure out how to work with in order to get that stuff done. And it means that sometimes I have to build up debt to get an inch where I really wanted a mile.
Mhm.
Um, and so there is that. I think you can do it in ways that are healthy, but it can turn into enmity and just firing cannons at each other, you know? But yeah, I think designers feel a deep responsibility to do what's right. I say it all the time, but like I try to create scenarios where users win our arguments because what
Mhm.
I know and what I feel and what my opinion is kind of doesn't matter. Just like a head of operations, their opinion kind of doesn't matter because neither of us are the patient or the doctor or whoever it is that we're serving. Those folks, their voice needs to radiate through what we're doing. And if possible, they need to be invited into that process to be a contributing element, a participant in the design of their own solution. Everything else just feels like it's like in art school, they teach you that if you look away from the subject when you're drawing, your brain is distorted, right? It's the same thing.
Mhm. Mhm.
If your secondhand, third hand information, now you're playing a game of telephone to try and represent somebody. And so I think designers trying to make that voice heard and shine through as authentically as possible, we
Mhm.
feel a deep responsibility to make that happen. And you'll see crazy creations to try and make that possible, massive research repositories, all sorts of different things that are just trying to help raise the water in positive ways for all of our coworkers to better empathize. Journey maps and blueprints and personas and all these artifacts are meant to fight that good fight, to represent these people and to acknowledge their contexts and try and meet them where they're at and do exactly what they need.
And like, because you have been working for a long time with a lot of different health companies, do you feel like the role of design inside the companies has been like kind of changing with time and is viewed more importantly and more like differently? Because like you mentioned about like a lot of times it doesn't matter what the head of operations care. Like it matters what the user care. But a lot of times we know that companies don't understand that. So like how do you see that like they view the role of design not only in user experience but like as a whole nowadays?
It varies wildly. I think some organizations have really succeeded in adopting design as a core practice, and invite it. You hear all the time like design needs a seat at the table. Design needs to be involved in early strategic
Mhm.
conversations,
Mhm.
right? Like it's all over everywhere. People have been clamoring for this for decades. In some places it's succeeded. And you see the other side of like we're here now. What do we do with that? I think in other organizations, it's still an uphill battle of design being seen as a delivery mechanism and more of a vendor instead of as a partner.
It is.
So, and I've worked in probably all of those settings. I've worked in places that are very design adopting from the beginning, and so you can dispense with all the headache of trying to prove yourself over and over and over again, and just get right to it. In other places, you need to show that you're a force multiplier. And so I think because it's so varied, it's really important for design leaders who can come in and assess a landscape and kind of recognize what strategy is going to make the most sense to try and make it work. So like one of the companies I worked at, operations treated design as a threat. They were, I was trying to parachute a couple of service designers in to do ethnographic research and kind of live in the lives of these care coordinators to better understand not just what they're telling us they were doing, but like what they were actually doing and what we could do to improve all that. So immediate bristling, why would we let them in here? No one has time to talk to your people, and like kind of just going through this thing of like, I'm trying to help you. Why are you turning down help? You know? And so we ended up creating like a massive Miro board of like, we tried this didn't work. What should we try next? And so we kind of treated it as a design project to iterate in the way that
Mhm.
we engage with these teams. What ended up working for us was using product as a Trojan horse. So embedded service design and product
Mm,
initiatives, product's a little bit more friendly with design. The three-legged stool is a little bit more solid in most places. We started to show the evidence of what our involvement was doing on the product side. Then operations started going like, hey, that's what if we did that over
Yeah.
here? I'm kind of in the background going, yeah,
They start to see
what
results
if?
and they get interested.
And so evidence wins the day, but a lot of it is just what language do they speak in, and can you become a fluent speaker in it? Can you recognize and acknowledge that they are measured and pressured in different ways than you might be? And that that's part of the fabric of the organization and critical to your relationship. So it's not going to be easy. It never is. Design has such a weird, floaty definition in a lot of companies.
yeah.
And so you guys probably know I've been writing a lot about measuring design lately because design doesn't own a lot of things. Uh, that adds to the challenge of how it's whether it's invited to those conversations because operation has very clear measurements around efficiency and overhead and throughput and all those things that operators are measured by, and that's been done forever. Finance has very clear measurements. Product and marketing have very clear measurements. Design's measurements are really a lot of it is either very, very nearby, and it's like, how fast did they do stuff? How accurate were their estimates? Or it's distant and you have to be friends with everybody like finance to go like, how did design's involvement improve cost to serve? Or return on experience. So we rely on those partnerships to showcase our value because they have to press the buttons, they have to write the code, they have to hire the people, but we're helping them see the way to do that.
Mm.
So to me, that's the thing that kind of once there's evidence, build on that evidence and let it snowball and start to showcase that this can be broader and when it's allowed to be broader, that net effect improves and gets greater and is felt more everywhere.
Yeah, that's awesome. And Adam, I wanted to go back a little to something you said earlier when you mentioned like, oh yeah, companies realizing, oh, we need a client portal and all this. There's a lot of like a basic stuff that half the companies don't have. Well, as designers and what we see in other products, and I feel like that sometimes half the companies, many of them, especially those that are aimed to consumers, they don't realize they are not competing only with other health tech products, especially like when you're looking at apps and all that. That even if you are the only one in the market, let's say for that segment, in your mobile app, you are competing with like the social media apps, with the gaming apps, like everything the people have that the user have there on their access, and they have some kind of experience with those apps that most of the time they're not reflected on a health tech product. And just what when you said just brought me back to this realization that this is something that if I believe like if health tech companies they treat more the products as like a competitor to all the other distractions that the user is facing, probably gonna give more attention to design, to the user experience, and how to make it more accessible and easy and better to use.
Totally agree, and it's a constant conversation. I think one of the questions you guys had sent me, I was going to go on for a while. This kind of is an interesting way to get into it. Is there's a lot of navel gazing in healthcare. It's a lot of like we've always done it this way, and even though it didn't work great back
Mm,
then, let's just keep doing it the same way.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
it's kind of insane. I'm often in conversations where I'm inspiring people and pushing people to look outside of the healthcare domain to see what's happening out there. Because like so consumer setting, right? Like we're talking to patients or maybe people we're hoping will become patients or something like that, right? We know they
mhm,
need something. They may not necessarily know they need it. They don't care that this is healthcare and in the healthcare domain things maybe move slower or they're not like they don't care.
yep,
They're surrounded with a world of incredibly well designed experiences that are very responsive to their needs and very personalized and depending on what you're looking for, like look at Duolingo and its use of gamification and storytelling and
yeah,
illustration and animation, or like so you look at these experiences, these folks are looking for that same sort of intuition in healthcare. And I think healthcare falls into some of these camps of like, well, because of all the interoperability that we have to make systems talk to each other, there's so much happening in the back end before we
mm,
can ever get to the front end. Consumers aren't aware of that. They kind of don't care about your problems. They're just aware that
Yeah.
healthcare is a big machine. It takes a while to move. Most of the time, it inconveniences them. Like how hard is it to tell somebody how much something costs in healthcare, right? From a consumer perspective, it's like, why can't I just know? And from the back end, you're like,
yeah,
well, insurers don't have portals that just tell us that. And then we have to call them and we have to sit on the phone for an hour and we can only call them with 3 different patient records because they won't let us do more. And then maybe they'll get back to us.
mhm,
And then maybe we'll be right and they'll be wrong. And then Then we've got to tell patients one thing, then we got to tell them something else, and so like patients are looking at this going, why? Netflix tells me the second someone tried to sign into my account and they want to make sure it's me.
Yeah.
Why can't I figure out that a visit's going to cost $400 or $20? So there's a lot of complexity that is not showcased. And honestly, like I'm not sure anybody's gonna have sympathy for it anyway. Like it would be easy from the
Hmm.
company side to say, like, look, we're just a facilitator between an insurer and a provider. And so all we can do is show you what comes out of that conversation. Consumer's gonna go like, I don't care, fix this, you know?
Yeah.
Um, and so, we'll run design sprints and stuff like that where I'm like, if this is all about engagement, like go to Netflix, go to Disney, go to places that are phenomenal at engagement and draw inspiration from there, and then let's let back to kind of constraints existing with regulations and compliance, like what can we do that will use that in a way that's useful, that will feel more familiar to folks, it will feel more intuitive and they can think less about it, and what can't we do? And for the things that we can't do, or the things that we have to be really prescriptive in collecting, tell them why we're collecting it, ask them if it's okay. um, I see all the time, every healthcare entity has intake forms. I'll beat them to death. I've designed intake forms forever. Very rarely are they going, here's why we're asking for that information. And,
Mm.
if you ask for someone's gender or you ask for a very specific, original culture or something, because some insurers will want that, like, are you Hawaiian? Are you, they'll want to know some of those things. Someone's going to look at that like, why? Why is this important? Well, there's another opportunity for relationship building. Tell them, hey, this is why we're collecting this from you, and this is how we're planning to use it. It doesn't take that much more effort, but it builds a bridge of understanding so that it can go like, oh, okay, this isn't as simple as I thought it was. And also, they're not
Mhm.
just trying to take my data and do God knows what with it.
Yeah, yeah.
So like, the
Also, like,
transparency, I think is yeah. Go ahead.
I feel that it builds trust, which nowadays with data is something really important. So, like, if you tell me how you're going to use my data, I might actually consider giving my data and not worrying about it. Especially
Yeah.
like if I notice that giving my data away, let's say, thing kind of I'll be receiving something customized, better, or anything like that might be better for me. So I feel that like at the end of the day, data is a currency. So if I'm giving you this, I'm expecting something better. So I feel that like this could also build a lot of trust in this kind of
Yeah,
Yes. And
and to me, like, oh, sorry, go ahead.
no, no, I was about to ask you a question around that. Just go ahead.
I was just gonna say, like, to me, it's even less about like the whiz bang stuff in products. Like, there's wonderful tools out there. We all use them. I think Airtable is probably like God's gift to mankind. It's amazing.
Uh-huh.
It's Airtable's incredible, right? But like, if
Yeah.
you took away Airtable's design system, if you took away Airtable's messaging and all that, it still has a functional value that is a force multiplier for everything you would be doing, right? It's spreadsheets for kids. It's awesome. It took a lifelong hatred of Excel and made it like spreadsheets are fun now. I do everything in Airtable. The relationship building and the personalization is the thing that matters. How you do it matters almost less, right? If I feel like I'm heard, I'll
Mhm.
deal with a clunky experience. Like that doesn't mean we should aim for that, but you should have both. If you should aim for both. But like the meat of it is like I want to be able to trust this organization. People have been going to doctors for years with terrible, awful experiences, right? But they still go.
Yeah.
So what can you do to make that this is like, heavily personal, probably the most personal engagement someone's gonna have with another entity. Look into that and care for that. And I think that's how we compete, is that a lot of these folks that use machine learning and all this to build patterns and try and surface what they think you need and all of that, like healthcare can make use of those things. It doesn't have to, it could. It just needs to go the extra mile to acknowledge the audience it's addressing and the various places they may be coming from and just like, be there with them, you know? Don't beat them to death with a textbook they're not gonna understand, you're just gonna scare them. I know you feel like it makes you seem credible, but patients are like, talk like we're talking.
Yeah, exactly. And I think you already kind of answered the question, but was basically understand how do you see this balance on using data, but at the same time keeping the patient experience like as personal, but especially empathetic as possible. Not personal, just like hi name of the patient, but how this can actually be used, especially giving all um the constraints in getting data in the health scenario, but how we can design those better experiences by getting access to it.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's so many ways to talk about data in this context. If you look at historical data for healthcare, it's already very biased, and so I think there's questions about how do you meet that data with qualitative studies so that you can balance it out, right? Most data in the United States that's healthcare is pretty affluent and white. It ignores a lot of underserved communities, and so, like, you could argue then if they're using that to build tools, it's already a biased tool that's
Yeah.
continuing a problem. If you're looking at it in terms of things like product metrics, data, conversion rate optimization metrics, like we've got drop
Mhm.
off, we've got, stuff like that. People are bouncing, people are, going places we don't expect, right? Like all that stuff is generally quantitative, and a lot of times that's where it stops. And so you'll sit in quarterly business reviews and you'll sit in stand-ups and all kinds of stuff where it's like, well, drop offs at 2% or 30% or whatever. And the next question is always, why do you think that's happening? And as a designer, I kind of like just ask them why they're leaving. And so I think a lot of times it's just find out why. You have a sense of that something is happening. Great. We launched an A/B test. The B variant did better, but no one asked why it did better. In some ways, you're
Mhm.
missing the more important data because it's not just going to tell you. A lot of times, it's not just going to tell you what's going on with that. It's going to tell you more about the audience and what they're expecting of you in much bigger ways. And so when data is just used in like cold quant, there's a place for it, and I'm not going to disagree with its value. What I disagree with is the half picture it represents a lot of times. If
Yeah.
we don't have qualitative context to help us understand the intent behind some of these choices, or the feeling space, or like the curiosity that comes out of it, we can't build better experiences. We're really just feeding a marketing machine, and at some point, then we're just sort of like patting ourselves on the back for how good we think we are at guessing. And so then it's
Yeah.
like we're investing in guessing, we're investing in ego, and sometimes it's like the
And that's
the
really
loudest
dangerous
person that
as well.
exactly, right, because then, like, what is this all for then? Like, if we're just gonna build this for ourselves, like, shut this whole thing down, you know? So, I think the other thing is this battle of can versus should, and data informs a lot of that, like, well, we totally can do this because data says we can do this, but, like, is anybody thinking about
Mhm.
how it would affect somebody? I like to pick on Apple's AirTag with this a lot, and Apple
Yeah.
designers, if they hear this, I apologize, but, like, I don't know the process, I don't know what they thought about, but, like, I think a lot about safety design, especially in healthcare, right? How can things be
Mhm.
used
Mhm.
to harm somebody? AirTag, great way to track your luggage across the world. Also a great way to follow someone home and murder them, And
Yep.
so, like,
Yeah.
where's the should mechanic in these conversations? You can force people to pay with their credit card before they have a visit. Should you? And so I think data drives a lot of those conversations too, where like you just look at numbers, you look at financial projections, and you go, we can do this. But never the moral and the empathetic side of like, should we do this? What are we making them give? What are we forcing them into? And what does that mean for their long-term relationship with our practice or with our business? What does it mean for their health outcomes on the other side? What does it mean for the trust we've built? Have we destroyed it now? Um, I think you need folks like design leaders, and I would love to see empathetic leaders in all practices, and I've seen them, and asking those questions too. Think of the cost beyond the short term, delivery that data is driving alone, likely without
Mhm.
qualitative.
I think in the end is we should find ways to invest in not as much on collecting the data, but in how we can ask better questions and how we can find like those answers, in a way that is more welcoming and more natural for people to also answer than just giving them a form, for example. That's where most of like those more qualitative data are collected, but it's still forms as well, just like the intake forms. They're not that good. Not
Yeah.
not for the patient, for the user side.
Well, and how much do you even really need to know to determine whether someone should be a patient or not, right? And like you hear
Mhm.
stories all the time, of, like these social media companies that have like warehouses full of data they've collected that they may never use, right? So
Yeah.
HIPAA
Yep.
prevents that sort of stuff, right? HIPAA is very like it's the data that's needed at the time for the use, and I kind of look at that and go,
Yep.
that's not a constraint, that's a gift. That is a wonderful
Yeah.
gift that we're only being contextually relevant with our data for a purpose, and if we can be transparent about it all the better. But yeah, I don't know. It's such a challenging topic because there's so many data-driven expectations upon
Yeah.
companies. If you look at the investor space, look at if you've ever been in a board meeting with investors, like there's a lot of just like, where's the hockey stick growth?
Yeah.
They want numbers. They want numbers. They don't want to hear like, if I had slides and slides that are like, well, yeah, but this patient was a rape victim and they don't ever want to be matched with doctors who had a male experience. Like they're gonna look at that and be like, so but does that mean you're gonna have less patients or more patients? And I'm like, that's
Yeah, yeah.
but
Yeah,
you
like
know,
you're always
yeah.
having to balance between the external needs of the investors and the persons that are like, let's say, like in control of the money and where things move, and the issues and the needs and the challenges of the user. So balancing those two sides is always challenging.
Yeah, but if I think some of it feels like short sight versus long sight too, right? Like my job is to kind of look 24 months into the future. Like, I'm a resident futurist. I'm looking at where things can and should go, and I'm trying to help us build
Mhm.
that. Which means sometimes the short-sightedness that you see out of a lot of these folks, like, is lost on me or it's an irritation for me, you know? And so someone's only looking 6 months in the future for something that's gonna pay off in 12 months. Sometimes I don't know how to help you with that, you know? Like, just to tell you to be patient is not gonna help anybody. No one likes being told to be patient. But at the same time, healthcare is like, it's not a transaction. Healthcare is, like, an ongoing thing, especially if you look at things like mental health. A lot of folks need lifelong care. And so those outcomes are measured in months, years, decades, you know? They're not measured in like, "Hey, we tweaked this button to a different color and engagement went up," you know? Like,
Yeah.
pat yourself on the back, man, because it didn't mean anything 6 months from now, you know? And so sometimes there's that battle of, "I get that you want this right now, but I need you to understand that if you get this right now, you're probably shortchanging this other thing, and what's more valuable in the
Mhm.
long term?"
Yeah. And also, like, I feel that the long term is always the most important for the end user because that's what sticks with them.
Well, the end user is not necessarily thinking on the business side of it, right? We're
No,
like,
no, no.
if
Yeah,
the
yeah.
door if the
They
doors are
don't
closed, you're
care.
not helping anyone. And
Yeah,
so
yeah.
I think you do have to have that balance of like, great, the doors have to stay open. What happens if you're a patient and your medical practice that you've come to trust is gone? Well, not only are you now back trying to find a doctor, you may have lost faith in that whole category of healthcare. So there's a lot at stake, and it means for some really it puts you into like some really difficult conversations then about what is the greater good and what does that mean for debt accrual? What does that mean for compromise? And that's the fun of it, I think, too, is what can we lead people to understand and believe? What do we have to pull back on? How do we communicate with the affected audience so they understand that we're still doing what's in the best interest of them, even if it might not be the thing that they are expecting right away? It's a challenging give and take.
Yeah. And like you mentioned about like as a design leader, you're always looking ahead 24 months in advance. Where do you see things going, changing? Like what do you feel that are your needs as a design leader and design teams and businesses? Is there any emerging technology that you see that could benefit? And yeah, like not even talking about AI because that's another
I
world.
mean, we can. I mean, it's upon us. You know, I think
Yeah.
there need to be a lot more conversations about ethical use of it, especially in the healthcare domain, since data is like necessarily protected. How do you train language models when you have those restrictions, right? Like you can do it in small ways and big ways. Self-service help centers, stuff like that. Certainly ways you can do it. You know, we go on and on about that. There's a lot of things that have been emerging for a really long time that are still like the future for healthcare, like value-based care.
Mhm.
We've been talking
Yep.
about transitioning to value-based care forever, since the '80s, you know, and like, yeah, it's totally the future, but it's a really slow move to this thing, you know, and there's just constant peaks and valleys and how we get there, but it comes back to data and evidence in a volume that will instill confidence in insurers. So I think there's that kind of stuff that's kind of always going. Healthcare transformation is a big topic of conversation. Things that feel like they've been around forever, like service design. Service design's been around for centuries, predates most other design
Mhm.
practices we know of, right? But only now am I seeing at healthcare conferences and CX conferences whole segments on service design. It's like they're finally getting it, and they're getting the need for this holistic view of how things work. We start getting into emerging technologies. I mean, sometimes it feels like a joke to talk about in healthcare, where it feels like some things are so far behind that if they would just get to the stuff that everybody thought was novel 10 years ago, would be winning. You know, how many EHRs still look like websites from 1998 and have just not
Yeah.
changed? Yeah. But when you look at things like AI and machine learning, or sentient design, I don't know if you guys are following kind of like bleeding edge design stuff, where it's usually just like, you know, rapidly and radically adaptive, personalized user experiences. I think that stuff is certainly where we should be heading in healthcare. Let's create experiences that are exactly what you need when you need it and get rid of all the signal noise. You see some of this is starting to happen. There's starting to be predictive modeling inside of clinical tools. There's starting to be, you know, intelligent notifications and all that stuff. And some of that's been around for a while. But there's so much noise. As a clinician, if I'm using a tool, I'm going, "What is all this other crap that I'm never gonna use at all that's causing, like, major
Mhm.
cognitive load, and it's causing all this head swiveling, and why?" You know, they measure things in clicks, even though, like, UX designers were gonna go, like, measuring things in clicks is a bad measurement, you know? But, like, anytime you talk to a
Yeah.
clinician, they're like, "I have to click this, like, 57 times before I get the notes." And you're like, "Oh my god." Like, you know? So I think things like that you can train with clinical workflows, with operational workflows, with care pathways, so they can be more just what you need and recede all that other stuff to the background. I think that's really where we need to head, and that should be true for the patient experience too. Whether that's, hey, we recognize that you were recently diagnosed with this, and so here's education if you'd like it, and you can tailor that however you
Mhm.
want and receive it however you want. Here's communications that you can have with, there could be chatbots. I think prescribable chatbots are a thing that are probably not far away. I think we're starting to see that as an emerging thing
Yep.
too. Is
Yep.
if you have clinically backed conversational experiences that are FDA approved, you could almost just write a prescription for a chatbot, just like you would write for meds. That sort of stuff is really going to transform the space. But just like everything else that's inventive in healthcare, we may be waiting for it a while.
Awesome. So, Adam, I want to thank you so much for sharing your experiences with us. I loved to learn about like expertise in shaping success in health tech through design. And if anyone watching or listening to us wants to connect with you, where should they go? What is the best place to connect with you, Adam?
I guess my LinkedIn profile and my website, adambunk.design. I mean, you can also find me on ADP list.
Awesome. So thanks for joining us and subscribe to keep up for our next episodes. And if there is someone you'd like to see in the podcast, let us know at cht@moe.studio. See ya.